doing better.
You trust fund baby.
Come on now.
You are so spoiled, man.
Yes. The resources of heaven, brother.
I know, you got it all. Can I get some?
Everything I need. Hey, everything that's given to me is given to you, bro.
Oh, damn. And yeah, I'm a trust fund baby too.
Yes, you are.
That's what all
Yeah,
of
you are.
I'm trust fund. I just been going to splurge, right?
Yes.
Make it rain. No?
Yeah.
Make it rain with
Jesus got
blessings.
it. Come on. He got it in the bank. So it's all good, man. Thank you for having me on, bro.
Yeah,
I got my notes in the background. Hopefully it's not no personal information.
No, not at all. Well, welcome to Table Talk Tuesday. I mean, this Table Talk Tuesday is really just trying to get to hear others' journeys. And like I told you on the phone, it's really just a discussion, you know? And we do it in this ministry. We really believe that as people share their story, a lot of revelation is going to come to them, you know? And it's going to help others. So everyone has a unique story. And sometimes you see people and their story is not what most think, you know? So it's good to hear the story and from the perspective of your voice.
Right.
You know, no one is telling your story like on a show, telling them, say, oh, this is what they think it's coming out of the horse's mouth.
Right, exactly.
Kalon, where are you from? Who are you?
So, great question, brother. So I am originally, I was born in the north suburbs of Chicago. So I'm a Midwest kid.
Oh, wow.
And my parents moved us to Wisconsin for a better education. So it's kind of funny, right? Like, we probably moved about 30 minutes north. So I was right on that Illinois-Wisconsin border. And I was in Illinois, but the school systems 30 minutes north in Wisconsin were by far, so far superior. So my parents made the move. They made the jump. They had lived in Illinois their whole lives, and they said, we're going to Wisconsin. Took me, older sister, my younger brother, and we moved to Kenosha, Wisconsin.
So, okay, so what age did you leave Chicago?
So I was in fourth grade. I was young kid. Yeah.
Grade. Do you have any like memories? Were your parents still together
Yeah, they are.
Okay. So, do you have any memories like before fourth grade? Like,
whoa, good question. So for sure. So memories before fourth grade. Yeah. So I grew up in my great grandfather's house. So my great grandpa, he basically built this house, and so we ended up living there. I was a young kid, but it was one of those houses where, you know, there were like nails in the wood panels on the floor. Like it was, you got to be careful. You kind of have to tiptoe around the kitchen. A nail is going to catch you. Wow. So it was kind of pieced together. You know, we didn't have a lot of money growing up. You know, we had one of them tubs. We had a tub, no shower, so we had to take baths all the time growing up. And we had, you know, in the bathroom, it was like flaking walls. So you're always itchy after like a bath because you had like, I don't even know what you call it, but yeah, the bathroom was deteriorating that much. So growing up, but it was an environment that was filled with love. I grew up with both my parents. I grew up with older sister, younger brother. I was the middle child, so I got all the middle child syndrome that you could.
Being ignored. Okay, so your parents were living with like their parents, right? Or your father's side or your mother's side?
So it got passed down to my parents. Okay. So it was my dad's side, but it was just my parents and us, the five of us. So me and my siblings shared a room, and it was.
Okay. Oh, so you lived and the house got passed down, and the memories that you lived, it was like kind of like you described.
Yep. So there was so my great grandpa, you know, many years before we moved in, he had built kind of an extension on the house, but it wasn't well kept. Like we didn't use it, and it was basically open to nature. So if you were to go into that extension on the house, you would see raccoons, you would see squirrels. So we always had like some sort of wildlife like in the back of the house. So it was just interesting. Like those are like the small little memories that I laugh about to this day. About the early days.
And I just have a quick question about your grandpa. What did he do? I mean, was he like? Did he work?
Yeah, he was a handyman, kind of like a union contractor. He worked. You know, I think he had a lot of factory jobs.
And his parents were from America too, or was he?
Good question. Yo, that's a whole thing. Like I have very little idea where my
Oh,
family's
okay.
from.
Okay.
Up to that point, like a lot of my family's from, like, track a couple generations. A lot of them are from Mississippi. But that's about as far back as we get. You know, I would love to do one of those
Right.
23andMe, or not even 23andMe, but I don't know if you've ever seen the show. I think it's What Are Your
Yeah,
Roots? I forget what it's
yeah. I
called.
know what you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah, man. I would love to do something like that with my family, figure out where I'm actually from. But you know, a couple generations I can track.
Okay, now up to fourth grade, were there any big challenges that you faced personally? I mean, if you can remember, or anything that I know you were talking about your living conditions.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you remember anything like before moving that I know probably?
Yeah. Yeah, well, a couple things.
Oh,
I'm not gonna lie to you. So
okay.
our school
Don't lie to
district,
me.
so so a couple things that kind of shaped the trajectory of my life and the things that I became
Yeah.
passionate about.
Okay.
You know, when I was in fourth grade, my elementary school, Green Bay Elementary, ended up being publicized on national television because we had a teacher who was separating kids based on race. And we had desks for the kids in fourth grade, light desks and dark desks. And the kids began to complain that all the darker kids were in the dark desks and all the lighted kids were in the light desks. And so that began to circulate as a rumor. But then the school went under investigation, and it was found out that this teacher was kind of segregating kids oddly based on where they came from and what they looked like. And so, yes. And so ultimately, you know, that was a big deal at our school. And on top of that, our school ultimately got taken over by the state government, our whole school district,
What?
because of how in shambles it was. In shambles. The school district was in shambles. That's why parents left. You know, like
Okay, so
teachers.
what age were you? Was that like in third grade?
Yeah, like third grade, you know, kindergarten to third grade, that kind of. So it was interesting. So at that time, like, I had never thought about so race to me wasn't really a concept quite yet.
Oh wow. Okay.
You know, like, I could probably tell you I look different than my best friend in kindergarten was a white kid named Zach. So, but I wouldn't have called him a white kid. You
Yeah.
know, I wouldn't call him a white kid in kindergarten. I was like, that's just
Yeah.
Zach.
Yeah.
You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like,
Yeah.
that's just
Yeah.
but it was a predominant, so it was all black and Hispanic kids. So Zach kind of stood out, and but we just, like, it just wasn't. It was just us, you know. And I didn't really have a concept of race. That was my first exposure to race. Was kind of this storyline in our school, and I was trying to make sense of it, like what was happening. And then when I moved to Wisconsin, like the whole world opened up to me. That I was like the first time I realized, like, I'm black, because when you move 30 minutes north across the Wisconsin border, I went from all black and brown kids to I was the only black kid in class, fourth grade year.
Wow.
So I don't know if anybody who's listening in has ever experienced something like that, like a cultural immersion. I don't know if you guys have traveled abroad or been in a country that's not your own. A lot of people don't realize that in America, there are countries that are not your own. It doesn't take you traveling outside onto international borders. Like, when I was fourth grade, it was the first time that I flew international. I moved to Wisconsin, and there was, you know what I'm saying? Like, it was wild. I flew international.
So it was a
30
culture shock.
Culture shock.
Like everyone looked at you like how did you feel? Like,
So I struggled. Brother. I struggled because, you know, I had a dialect. You know, I talked a certain way. I said certain things, and just the culture difference. You know, I got ridiculed, bullied a lot. You know, I didn't really have, like, other kids like me that kind of understood me early on. And so early on, I got teased a lot for my vocabulary, like the way I speak. And early on, like, like the psyche level, like, you got to watch kids. There's a lot of, like, development happening at that age, right? A lot of things that we start to believe about ourselves at that time. And so I started to believe a couple of things. One, I wasn't smart. One, I wasn't intelligent. One, I didn't have a vocabulary like the other kids. And so I didn't know, a lot of my motivations in the years following were based out of those places of hurt, because of that cultural immersion, culture shock had placed me somewhere where I couldn't defend myself. I didn't know that these kids were ignorant. I just thought these kids knew better.
Yeah.
I didn't know these
You
kids.
thought they were telling the truth.
Right. Yeah,
You
yeah.
thought they were
I just
seeing
thought
a truth in you that you didn't see.
exactly, exactly. And I thought these kids were, um, yeah, they were just like, you know, they didn't know either, right? So sometimes, and I'll say this too, like most of America is like this. We are separated along racial lines. So if communities are usually predominantly one race, like we're still largely segregated, not by boundary lines enforced by the law, but they're boundary lines that were once enforced by the law that are now just reinforced culturally.
Like so.
And so most black kids grow up around black kids in America.
Hmm.
Most white kids grow up around white kids in America. To grow up in a real diverse setting is rare. And so a lot of these white kids just had no interactions with a black kid. They didn't necessarily know how to the cross-cultural context. And I didn't know how to do the same. So
And
I internalized those
so
things.
were you like the black kid on TV for them, or the black representative? Were you the Will Smith? Were you every black person that every basketball player or football player? Were you that guy for them?
You know, that's funny. I don't know if that's how I would describe
Yeah,
it, but it could be. That could
yeah,
be it, you
yeah.
know.
Like you and
You
that
are,
filter. You're like, hey,
yeah, yeah.
I got a black friend,
Yeah,
Kalon.
exactly. I feel in a large, there was a lot of that. I would say I felt it more with the teachers than with my peers. I
What?
felt that the
Wait, wait,
teachers,
wait. The teachers who had the like knowledge and supposed to have less ignorance because they have more intelligence, you felt it with more the teachers than
yes,
the actual students who were actually ignorant.
yeah, because you know, I think part of the teachers were like, oh, I think they felt almost responsible for me. Like they felt like I needed the extra attention. They felt like, you know, you kind of become a token to them, and you kind of get circulated among the teachers. And early on, I exhibited some intellectual um, proficiency. You know, I didn't know that, but you know, I was smarter than a lot of the kids. Um, and so after a while, you know, you kind of get tokenized a little bit, and I felt like, you know, when some of the things were happening, you know, it was the first time I ever got called the N-word, right? Like it was fourth grade, you know,
Oh wow!
and I
By
had
who?
heard the word.
Was it a student or was it like adult?
I was a student. I was a student. Joey. I'm not gonna say his last name. I actually don't remember his last name, but Joey, yeah, on the playground, man. And at that point, no, it was actually fifth grade because I had a friend, Vincent, who was also black in fifth grade. And Vincent was like the cool, athletic, sporty kid. I was kind of like small, kind of nerdy at the time, you know what I'm saying? And Vincent, you know, this Joey kid ran up to both of us talking nonsense, right? Talking to the two black kids and just let it out, let it loose, you know what I'm saying? And I realized that was kind of a point of conflict. Like, what was that? I didn't know what that was. And I didn't know, I didn't have any teachers on school grounds that were equipped for that because the teachers probably didn't really deal with black kids all that often. And so I didn't necessarily know how to figure that out, reconcile what that was supposed to mean about me. And so there's all these things happening. Teachers tokenizing you, kids kind of trying to get a feel for why you talk that way. And what happened is it was a convergence of influences where I ended up being this kid that tried to tone down his blackness. Like I tried to tone down my blackness, and I found that my escape, you know, was interesting. I almost paired these two things. I felt like I had this escape in my intellect, and it felt like as I pursued my intellect, I became more accepted and rewarded. And I toned down my blackness. I felt like I was less different and I could fit in. And both these things were happening. And I began to see this distance where I was like, you know what? In order to be smart, I have to tone down my blackness. Or in order to tone down my blackness, I have to be smart. And I saw a difference between, you know, intellect and success and black early on as a kid.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Did you feel ice?
So,
Okay, so now saying that as you travel that journey, right? There must have been
mhm.
experiences that you were out and about, you were in the mall, you were about other black people that, you know, now you went from being all black and know how to be in that environment, and then you went into this tunnel of like evolution into this new creature. Tell me
Right.
about the other side of that. When now you're this new creature, and now you're around other black folks. How did you feel?
Like, because my family's black,
Yeah,
so I'm used to my
yeah.
family, that kind of thing. But it wasn't really. I'm gonna be honest with you. It wasn't. Being in Wisconsin, I didn't really for a long time. I was never really in predominantly black communities
Oh wow.
until I went back home to see my grandma or whatever. And so that was the culture. I'm very used to like navigating white spaces, like very accustomed to it.
Oh wow.
So even middle school, high school, and it wasn't until college. This is crazy, right? So I went to college in Wisconsin, University of Wisconsin, La Crosse, western side of the state. And, I was in Kenosha, Wisconsin, which, if you know the state, it's about 30 minutes south of Milwaukee. Milwaukee is the biggest city in Wisconsin, largest black population. The only place with a hood is Milwaukee. You got a hood, it's in Milwaukee.
Yeah.
So, but the rest of Wisconsin is like white. You're not going to see black people, brown people like that. But I was close enough to Milwaukee, but I never really spent time in the city since growing up until I went to college. And a lot of my friends in college, there was like a portion of black students at my school. It was another predominantly white institution, admittedly. We had about 10,000 students. This is how many black students you think there were at University of Wisconsin, La Crosse, out of 10,000? This is 2012 when I was a freshman. What do you think?
2012, probably 2000.
Nah, bro. Nah.
500.
Okay, you got 10,000 students. There were 77 black kids.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So another predominantly white space. So I'm learning a lot, but from an interesting perspective. Like I'm learning a lot about whiteness growing up. I'm learning a lot about whiteness, and I've internalized some things about my blackness, but I didn't realize some of those things until I went to college, and I befriended a lot of the kids from Milwaukee. I befriended a lot of kids from Milwaukee, and I ended up basically getting into our Black Student Union freshman year and beginning to put language to the things that I had seen and heard and felt for the first time. I found a tribe. A lot of these kids from Milwaukee kind of like, and I think they had a good sense of what black was, and they were proud of black. They were proud of it.
Yeah, yeah.
And they were in a space where they wanted to make sure that we were all proud of it. And I think those partnerships and those friendships early on made a huge impact on my life because it was finally enough. I found a safe place where I could put language to what I felt and then to begin to express myself and say, no, when I was in fourth grade and I felt like black and smart were two different things. No, they're not.
Mm-hmm.
When I was in fourth grade and I felt like I talked wrong, no, it's called Ebonics.
Yeah.
It's called, it's African American vernacular English is what it's called. It's the dialect, right? When I was in fourth grade and the teachers tokenized me, I know why they did that now. And I'm prepared for that in college. So a lot of those things came to a head, and I was in like freshman year. I met my tribe and I got really involved in student organizations. Ended up being a president for 2 years of our Black Student Union.
Oh wow.
Vice president for one, president of the BSU for 2 years at the university, and did a lot of work just trying to get that message, especially when you have such a small black population. You got to get people together and say, we're in this together. Don't feel alone. Embrace your blackness.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And so much of that stuff was going on at that time. So it was great.
So as far as let's go back to high school. Like while you was in high school in this new world, and this is a couple years in, right? Past middle school, and you've been in this new space of Wisconsin. Were there any other challenges besides race that you kind of faced?
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, wow.
High school. Yeah, high school. I think personally, so I'm a PK. If people don't know what that means, I'm a pastor's kid.
Okay.
So my dad started a church when I was in middle school. I grown up going to church, and my dad started a church, and so we did basement church for a while. We was in our basement Sunday morning. That's where we started, right? Yeah. And then we moved to like a hotel or we was like at a guitar center for a while. Just kind of popping around Kenosha, Wisconsin. My dad was a pastor. It was always kind of a small church, but his heart was to pastor people. My dad is the wisest guy I know. My dad is the wisest guy I know. He's got the spirit.
Wait, first of all, let's take a pause. I love when people honor their father. I really do. It's a blessing, especially young black men honoring their father.
Yeah.
It blesses my heart to hear that, you know.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
I know it blesses his heart. I'm a father, so when you say that, it just blesses my heart because so much. We live in a generation, especially in your. I don't know if you're Gen X or Gen Z. You probably Gen Z. And Gen,
I'm
I mean Gen
millennial.
Z or millennial.
Millennial. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, or millennial. So especially in your generation, millennial, Gen Z, they have a way of not honoring their family at all. Like they don't.
Yeah.
So it's good to hear. I mean, you said that without prompt or anything like that. So I just had to pause because I was
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, it's real. It's real. Like I
would love to hear my kids always say. I would love to hear all my kids say that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure they feel it. Sometimes you got to get them to say it, though.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Words of affirmation are important.
Yes.
But yeah, there's a lot of good fathers. There's a lot of good fathers. A lot of good black fathers.
Yeah.
And my dad was one of them.
Yeah.
He was faith-filled, loved God. You know, he had a radical transformation. You know, as a young guy, you know, he was kind of living life on the streets and doing everything he wasn't supposed to be doing, drinking too much, smoking too much, that kind of stuff. Yeah, just wasn't taking God seriously. Had no fear of God. You know, my grandmother is the matriarch of my family, and this is all on my dad's side. So my dad's mom, right?
Yeah.
Feared God, took him to church, but my dad departed. You know, he's young. He kind of did his own thing, and he had a couple of crazy encounters with the Lord. Like almost died in a car crash. Lord encountered him and told him to get his life together. He met my mother, but my mother loved the Lord, and he really wasn't taking him seriously. But he loved her so much, right, that he got his life in order with the Lord. You know, there's so many things that guided my father into order, into the fear of God. Because here's the thing, like when God wants you, he'll make it known. And there are some things that we can explain away. Oh, happenstance. I'll say this right now. If you're alive and breathing today, it means that God wants you. He's got a purpose for you.
Yeah.
And I think like sometimes we're like, because something's not spectacular, it's not supernatural. You know, it's supernatural that we wake up every day because it's an indication that God is in control. He's moving and he wants something out of your life. He has a purpose for you. And so my dad had a couple of encounters that were more spectacular in nature, but he ended up finding that God had a purpose for him. And as I was getting older, he started a church. You know, that was his whole testimony. You know, like my dad never cried until he started talking about his testimony. That was the only time I ever saw my dad cry. He started talking about his testimony, and he would get choked up with what the Lord did in his life, saving him. And yeah, so I appreciate he's very wise. I'm a PK, so I did church all the time. But growing up, I kind of took I had the tendencies and the predispositions to do what my dad did. You know, in high school, like I kind of wanted to hang out with the wrong crowd. You know,
Kalon?
What? You know, I got me. I'm buttoned up. You know, but that's all. Well, I also one thing I realized is like I knew how to perform. Like when you're a PK, you know the things to say, and you know like how to get by without ridicule or people looking at you like, oh, this guy's going down the wrong path. I learned how to live in two worlds.
Wow.
I learned how to kind of serve two masters, so to speak. And so I think in high school I started to develop this tendency to want to rebel. I felt restricted in my house. I felt like God didn't really want the best for me. He only had conditions that he was placing on me. And so I realized that in high school I began to kind of familiarize and associate with some guys that weren't bad kids. The thing about it is like, just because like you're a kid and you get yourself into some trouble, I mean, it don't mean you're a bad kid. You know, sometimes like you just need guidance. You need some influences in your life. And while I should have been that young kid with the confidence and security to be like, no, like this is how we should be living our life, I was a little bit more of a follower in high school. So I struggled with that. But I wasn't crazy. I wasn't super rebellious. I wasn't like out late partying or anything like that. But there's some tendencies, like I really didn't care for school. I wasn't applied. I got in trouble at school, and I'm surprised that I got into the school that I did because I didn't take high school very seriously. And so I'm seeing a tendency here where like my faith is not a conviction quite yet. Like what it looks like to live for Jesus, have conviction, live excellently. It just felt like baggage at the time. And that was high school for me. It felt like baggage.
Your faith, okay, let's take a step back. So your faith, something that was restricting you from fun.
Yes, exactly.
Preventing you from living your life. So you didn't
Yes.
see any value in it at
I
that time.
I saw value in that it kept order. You
Okay.
know, my household was a house of order.
Okay. Order. I love that.
Yeah, and so I felt that, but it was almost like I viewed God like almost through the lens of my dad was he's a guy of order, right? Like, you know, there are things that you have to get done, responsibilities that you have. And I viewed God that way. It was transactional in that sense. Like God clearly wants me to be ordered. He has a certain expectation of me. But I don't know if I necessarily felt like God loved me in that I could actually be satisfied in God, that I could thrive in Him. I thought I just had an obligation towards Him. And so early on, high school, that's how I felt. And so there's a scripture, you know, that says that the Bible or the law, it calls the law, the scriptures, the text, the holy text, the perfect law of liberty. And I had never encountered a law that liberates. You know, there's a difference, right? Like there's the law that condemns. See, we think about Christianity and we say, this is the law and it tells me what to do all the time.
Mhm.
It tells me what I got to do, what I got to fix. But the Bible says it's the law of liberty, which means that the law is meant to set you free and it's meant to satisfy you. It's meant to bring you into an intimacy with your creator. It's not a set of rules. It's not a set of ethics. It's not a religious exercise. It's an avenue in a way that God creates, and it's boundary lines that God creates so that we can grow familiar with His goodness.
Yeah.
And I only saw the boundary lines. I didn't see the goodness on the other. I didn't see the
Yeah.
law.
See.
I saw the law, but I didn't see
So,
the liberty.
so it's like you and a lot of people like that's living up there. It's like they feel like God is suffocated because they see religion opposed to the freedom that comes.
Right.
All right. So you kind of rebelled in high school a little bit, and you're doing your own thing, and your faith was more like you know how to live in two different worlds. And then
Yep.
you're in college. You're the president of the Black Student Union, and you're looking at how's your college life?
I had a lot of fun. I had a good time.
Yeah, you had the typical college life. Yeah.
Yeah, typical college experience. Yeah, a typical college experience.
Yeah.
You know, I was out the house, man. I was out the house. Like once my sister went to college, she went to University of Minnesota. I was probably a sophomore in high school, and I went on tour. I toured it with my sister. I'm like, yo, I can't wait for college, bro. I cannot wait, man. It's a whole different life. And I went to college, and it was, you know, like I had a lot of fun. I met a lot of cool people, but I lived relatively lawlessly. And I mean, not lawlessly in regards to like governmental, like,
Yeah.
you know, state
You
laws,
wanted to do
but the
your thing.
laws of God, right?
Yeah.
Like I kind of just lived lawlessly. Want to do my thing.
Yeah.
So girls, drinking, all the things.
Yeah.
So, you know, I thrived, like, because I felt like I was finding some identity in other places. One, you know, being a black kid, realizing that I'm black and black is really cool. You know what I'm saying? And I realized that I had a lot to offer in terms of, you know, equipping and encouraging other black students. So I did a lot of that, and I grew leadership wise. You know, I had a lot of involvement and influence in our university, especially going through so much, even as the country was going through so much. There was so much happening on our campus. And that was dating back to, I think that was Michael Brown. Yeah, 2014. He was shot in St. Louis or in Ferguson. That happened. In the midst of that, there was a lot of opportunity for me to grow as a leader, to galvanize students and figure out what we're going to do.
Also,
And
you were a student at that time in college?
yeah, yeah.
Wow, that seemed like yesterday.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. So that was like 9 years ago.
Oh.
9 years ago.
Okay, so I
And
have a question for you. Like, I know in these spaces you knew how to respond, and you're talking about tokenism a bit. Now, did you ever find yourself in like predominantly black spaces and being rejected? I know you talk about one side, but did you ever find yourself?
you know, not really, only because, and this is actually where I knew I had grace. I knew that God was with me on certain things, because I always felt like I didn't grow up in a black neighborhood. I didn't grow up around black people like that. And when I went to college and people in like the 50 black kids from the city were like, "Hey, we want you to lead." I was like, "Who, me? Bro, I'm from Kenosha. Like, what do you want? What do you want from me?" I didn't feel
You felt
qualified. I didn't feel,
accepted
yeah,
then.
yeah, yeah. I felt accepted then. I realized that the thing about being black is like a lot of people try to put restrictions on what black is, what black sounds like, what black looks like. You know what I'm saying? And if you're not from the hood, if you don't speak a certain way, like, like, but that's not necessarily. It's not a fair
Yeah,
assessment of what black is. Black is diverse and beautiful and can sound a lot of different ways.
yeah,
And so that was kind of where I began to kind of redeem some of those things, some of those fears, which is like, am I black enough? You know what I'm saying? But
yeah, yeah. I asked that because I know in college, and I was in some white spaces, and so I mean, I got it from both sides. Like one side, I felt like one side didn't accept me, and the other side, I looked like them and they didn't accept me because of your vernacular, the way you talk, and the way you communicate is different. So it's kind of isolated in that sense. So
yeah, I know a lot of people feel that way.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people can feel that way. And I realized that, it can be kind of an exclusive community.
yeah.
And so I actually have some friends in St. Louis right now where I was talking to them about, they felt like, oh man, I never felt black enough for certain things. I'm like, that's like a really common, I feel like it's actually a common feeling for a lot of black people.
Yeah.
Because there's a certain black that gets pressed. This is black.
No,
it's pressed.
This is actually a good conversation because when you come down to it, anyone, even someone, say if someone grew up in a white space and they're black, like a black child grew up, and they go in any space and they're like, oh, you're not black. Anyone.
I lost your audio for a second. Hold on. Can you hear me? Right.
It's going to be it's going to be a black experience.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
I'm gonna have to pause
sure.
this
Yeah.
just for 1 second. All right, brother. Hold on.
All right. I'm gonna talk to y'all while Eddie paused it.
Exactly. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So yeah, okay. So yeah, anyone who experienced that have the black experience, like regardless of if you don't grow up around black people,
Right.
It's a black experience.
Exactly.
Because you are different. People are gonna treat you as black, so you have an experience to share. No matter how you talk, no matter how you look, your black experience is different. Sometimes I feel like there's groups or certain people have a mindset of what black is, and they try to exclude you and say, "Oh no, you're not black because of this." When I was dating, I just remember this in college. Like when I was dating one of my ex-girlfriends, and I'm like Afro-Latino. When I was dating one of my ex-girlfriends, and she was, African-American, she said that you're not black. And I couldn't believe she said it. I was like, what do you mean? I couldn't comprehend when she called, but now that I'm older, I realize her experience of what black is different than who I was. But when I was younger, I could not put my hand around what she was saying. I thought it was the most ridiculous thing because I'm like, look at my skin color. I'm black,
Yeah, that's interesting because, I think that's the thing, right? Because there's the black that is acted upon you. So when you say, okay, there are different types of black, Afro-Latino, African-American, like at a certain point, or even Dominicans. My roommate, one of my best friends is Dominican, right? So I hang out with his Dominican friend. I didn't grow up around Dominicans. I grew up around like Mexicans. Like my Hispanic friends were Mexican. That's all I knew. I actually, before I moved to Boston or went to college, I only thought the only Hispanics I thought that were on the planet were Mexicans. I didn't even know. I was like, that's all I know. I didn't even know no Asian people. Was kind of like I knew Mexicans and white people. And so now I'm in Boston, right? And this is the first time I've really been around Dominicans. And I would hang out with his friends, and for a long time it took me a while to say. I would just assume all of his friends were black. They grew up black. They only spoke English, like African American, like black. You know what I'm saying? And they're all Dominican. Like you wouldn't be able to tell a difference, right? Yeah. Like you were like, whoa, you're Dominican, because they'll come up to you and they'll start speaking Spanish. I'm like, bro, like you try to dap them up and they start talking Spanish to you. I'm like, oh, you're Dominican. I would never know. I thought you're black. It was the first time that I realized that this black experience, people will act upon you. Like if you're black and you're in a space, people going to treat you like you're black no matter where you came from, no matter what your name sounds like. So that's the one thing we have in common. Is like, you get pulled over the top
of being different. But you know, this is the thing about it. Like, we live in a culture that, like, you went through a journey in middle school, right? And you had to come to a realization, and it was hard for you. You had to you had to suppress certain things to live, right? And you came to the other side of that, representing who you were, right? And embracing and being more comfortable with where you are. Let's keep in mind, not everyone has gone through that journey, right?
Yeah.
So some people, and I think that had a large part to do with your intellect. Like you're able to assess your situation. But let's keep in mind with individuals that don't have these faculties, right?
Sure.
So they grow up in their adulthood not going to the other side of that. They still trying to identify. And you see that, I can say in my Latin culture, like there's a lot of people that looks darker than me and wouldn't even say that they are black. You know what I mean? So it's because of they haven't gone to the other side. And I think that's an intellectual discussion to have, because it requires self-reflection, understanding the culture and understanding who you are, and not saying you're one this or that, just understanding your experience is your experience,
Sure.
And embracing your African roots that have a big part of who you are, But it's also good to understand that it's different. Like we are different. We are different cultures, We are different people in different groups. Even though, we all might share the same skin tone or skin color, we are very diverse in our approach forward,
Super diverse, I think we're talking about different, because every even land has its different histories with blackness. Like I'll say, the thing about African Americans or Native blacks to the continental United States, if you could trace your lineage back to slavery in America, it's interesting because race over time has played out differently in different places, and so we can all kind of say and agree. Race is socially constructed. Like, a race has over time been developed. I'm not saying ethnicities, right? Like ethnicities are true. They're where you're born is like a biological, like this is your people group, right? But you're at race, like what it means. Like for me that you would both say we're black, that's socially constructed. That's something that we've said. We've applied a name and a meaning to something that we've identified in the phenotype, in the way that we look, in our nose and our lips. And so if you look at a lot of things, like if you look at the Holocaust, a lot of people don't realize that, in a large part, like the Jews had to be racialized, right? Like at that time, scientifically, there was hierarchy. Even like there were pseudoscientists who were hired to artificially fabricate race as a scientific fact. And as if like we're all like we're different somehow. And so if you look, I wish I could show you, but there were like pseudoscience charts that would say like Italians are like a sub race and Aryans are like a master race, and the Jewish people are the inferior class with blacks, and this was like scientific hierarchy. And there are areas in our history, global history, where race was developed. If you look at America, race was developed for the sole purpose of a couple things. We're a capitalistic country. When slavery, early on, right, and the colonies are being developed, we didn't really have like race-based slavery, right? Like there was, you would see white people, black people working together until we started to churn the transatlantic slave trade. And in order to make the transatlantic slave trade work in America, is you had to have a ruling class and you had to have a slave class. And in order to get white people all in the same boat, to get some of these Africans to do slave labor, they had to incentivize that being white was different than being black. It made the low-income working class begin to divide against each other. Because at a certain point, like it's the rich and the poor. And when the poor is white poor, black poor, And the white poor and the black poor, we got the same problems. Even in America today, you know, white poor people, black poor people, we got the same problems. But if you look at how we vote totally different. The poorest of white people are the most conservative. The poorest of black people are often the most liberal. Why is that? When you have the same problems economically, is that we've placed a lot of value. Race has indicated to us what we are and who we are and how to vote. Race has mattered historically that much. And you have to track it back to slavery and saying the working class were whites and blacks. But the only way to facilitate the churn of the elites being able to monopolize and make money off the backs of poor people was to get white people and black people on different pages, to not get them together working against the elites. You know what I'm saying? Where it's like, oh, no, we're on the same team, but we're on different teams. And it allowed slavery to begin to actually grow and proliferate in America. So I kind of went on a little tangent there, but I find it so interesting because I study this stuff. And so it's real interesting how we kind of develop ideas of race. We have to, like you said, some people need to develop in the faculties, but it's really important because it helps you begin to decipher what it is that you're experiencing. I can now look at the political landscape and say, wow, there's some real cultural divides here, how people vote. But if I look at our history, I can then begin to develop, this is why we're here, where we're at, if that makes sense.
Yeah, bro, you go deep. And to be honest, I did not, to be honest, you got a lot of like knowledge in regards to a lot of this. And I did not perceive that we would have such a deep conversation in regards to race. I did not, to be honest, which is good, which is revealing. So let's talk about, like, okay, so after college, how did that look? You're out of college. What's your journey there?
After college. So what did I do after college? I went straight to more school. So I went to grad school. Okay. And, you know, grad school wasn't so much I want to go to grad school. It was more, I don't really want to go to get a job. So I did grad school instead. So I had a couple options. You know, I was going to go to Chicago. I was going to go out to California, or I was going to go to Boston. And I'm going to Boston because the other options, one was too close to home. The other one was a Christian school. And like I told you, I was living a little more lawlessly at the time. So I felt like I wanted my freedom. So I chose Boston. And I don't know why, bro. I don't know anybody else. I don't have family in Boston. I don't got friends in Boston. I just like good school. So I'm going to go. New place. So I got away. Like, it was weird. Like, I moved by myself. I took like 2, large suitcases, flew to Boston one day, and I moved in as a student, in August of 2016. Yeah, went by myself. So we got some Boston lovers in the comments.
Yes.
So I moved and I went to Boston University. I did school for about 1.5 years, got my master's. And then I found work in media. I started working in media. I had a communication degree, undergrad. I had a media degree in grad school. It's kind of a weird kind of path I took into grad school, but I ended up working in media. In undergrad, I was communication broadcast. So I liked to talk. Yeah. So I would be on TV. Like, we had our...
You like to talk?
Yeah, I love it, man. No, it's funny because, like, that's what my dad did growing up. He preached, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, all right, like, I feel like I heard people articulate for a living.
Yeah.
So, and then at that time, what was I doing? I did broadcast. So I would do sports broadcast, play-by-play. Undergrad.
Did you have any challenges coming to Boston? Like, did you have any major challenges that you had to overcome? Or were you able to find a job quickly? Were there things that you encountered that may stop someone? Or?
Yeah, so, it's hard to find a job. I actually I had a friend who hired me basically out of grad school. She didn't really care about what I did. She was like, oh, you need a job. I can find work for you. So she worked at the media firm and hired me. And I wasn't really doing a lot that had to do with my degree. Was it hard? Yeah, well, Boston's an expensive place to live. I was out here by myself. I wasn't making a lot of money out of grad school. So I was dealing with some depression at the time. Oh, wow. Depression and discouragement, yeah. And I didn't know I was dealing with depression. I didn't know how to identify.
How did that come across to you? Like when you say you were dealing with depression, were you like going home sad every day? Were you not eating? How did that look for you?
Yeah, yeah. So it manifested a couple of ways. Like I was fearful, so I would go to work fearful. Um,
Oh,
of like I was always afraid of losing my job. I had no reason to be afraid. Like my friend was basically my boss, right? But I was always afraid of like losing my job early on, because I didn't know if I was providing value, and I didn't look. So I never looked forward to the next day.
wow.
Uh, never looked forward to the next day. Like I struggled to get through the days, and I realized I was working so hard at that time too. I'm just like putting in a lot of hours. Um, and so
Proving,
I didn't really get, what was that?
proving, and
Yeah,
anxiety.
yeah,
Okay.
exactly. So there was a lot of anxiety, trying to prove my worth, things of that nature. And I think that was pretty much it. Like I wasn't like crazy,
But
like,
isn't
you
that
know,
interesting? Like this theme that comes up, like from your going to fourth grade over there, like prove who you were,
yeah,
and I hear you years later, you dealing with that same demon, that
yeah.
proving. You know, how did you like it? Like you overcame it a little bit, but this is the chapter 2 in overcoming. You know, it's the same thing. Proving. Do you feel like proving is a theme that sometimes come in your life?
Bro, I need a therapist, bro. You wanna be mine?
I'm a life coach, bro. So no, like proving. Do you feel like you know as you go through, and that's a thing that comes like you may overcome, but then you get to a point where you start fearing because you feel like you have to prove. You know?
Yeah, yeah. Um, I do. Yeah, all the time. Even now.
Yeah. That's
Things I'm going through
a
now.
moment, bro.
Yeah, where I'm like, oh, why do I feel like I have to like prove people wrong? That's very spot on. I literally was talking to someone using those very words. I'm consistently trying to prove people wrong, and that started. So I could track that back to fourth grade, right? Like trying to prove people wrong. So that was at work, trying to prove people wrong. I'm in ministry right now. So I'm at a local church. I lead a youth ministry, and there's a lot of my motivation, even in youth ministry, trying to perform. There's a danger. You're trying to serve the Lord, but you're also trying to prove to people that you can do it, or that you're adequate, that you're competent, that you're holy. You know, and so that's definitely a trend, I would say.
Bro, let me tell you something. This is how I met you. I heard you talk. You just had to talk. I heard you talk while going to church in Orlando, and you have it, brother. The Holy Spirit, there's nothing for you to prove at all. You have the goods that most people want. What you have inside you, most people dream to get to that level. But what's going to happen in your life is people are going to not act like it's there. They act like it's not recognized. They act like it's not the other way. And like, but the ones that are of God and that don't care, like they just love beautiful things, they're going to celebrate you. They're like, yo, this kid had arrived. So I just
Right.
want to encourage you. Like I told you this like years, I think a year or two ago, when you came out, like, bro, keep doing what you're doing because you have a word inside you and there's no proof. It is what it is. It's what's been placed inside you and you just have to share it,
Yeah.
But that's the lie of the enemy that's kind of coming back over and over again to kind of limit that word.
Yeah. I agree. I agree with that assessment, and I receive it, brother.
Yeah.
I receive it.
And that's what you
I
said.
appreciate it.
You said that same thing a year, 2 years. I don't know if it's been 2 years ago or whatever. But you said I receive it. But it's true. So keep doing what you're doing, man. Keep on spreading. I think you have a ministry. I mean, if you guys are not following him, go ahead and follow Kalon the Game on Instagram. You have good word and let it come out. You have your own platform to share that word. So
Yeah.
I would definitely encourage you to continue on. All right. So the depression for you looks like fear, anxiety. The next day you don't want to you just wasn't looking forward to the next day. And you said you didn't know this was depression, but that's good that you put depression in this sense because people are dealing with all of these things constantly and they don't know they're depressed, So how did you come out of that, or how did you travel through that, or are you still traveling through that?
Yeah, so at that time too, I was there was a couple of things going on, but work was a big thing. Like I place a lot of value in my education, my skill set, producing a level of success at work, and I wasn't feeling like I was at a job that I could really apply myself. I didn't feel like I was bringing anything of value. So I felt like I was just clocking in and clocking out, and I was afraid. I had projected. I feel like depression has a lot to do, for me, it had a lot to do with projecting and simulating your future, you know, and coming to wrong conclusions about what your life will look like, you know, in this current state. And I felt at that time that my life was a failure. Like I had moved to Boston, and I could have did this at home. I could have did this in Wisconsin, you know, come here doing this stuff for very little money. And at that time, I also had a load of debt. I forgot to include that. So I had a lot of student loan debt. And if anybody out there has student loan debt, you have to, there is a level of burden and baggage it places on you mentally that needs to be dealt with. Like I felt in a lot of ways, I felt almost in bondage to debt. And so I felt like I would go to work. I worked for debt. I was working to pay off debt. I worked, and I felt like my life was kind of this endless cycle of just trying to get out of a hole that I had dug myself in. And this was because I had no way of kind of grasping what it was that I was feeling. I wasn't making a lot of money. I wasn't really in a position that I could apply myself. So I felt like all these things were resulting in, why did I come out here? What was the purpose? And so I didn't realize I was in that place until maybe 2 years later. And coming out of it probably included a couple of things. Mentorship. I had guys in my life who spoke life into me, who let me cry on their shoulder, and really set me free from feeling like I was doing it by myself. There weren't a lot of things, I'll be honest, like my job didn't change overnight. Like I worked at that place for, I think, 6 years. I ended up being a director at the firm. I ended up making more money than I thought I'd ever make at a job. And by the time I was 25, I ended up, you know, like having a real plan for my finances and my student debt. I ended up feeling like purposeful, you know, at work. But that stuff didn't happen overnight. What I realized is that the encouragement that I received along the way was my salvation.
Yeah.
It wasn't things changing in my life. It was my mentality changing is actually probably what helped produce more change circumstantially. But it's because I started to believe a couple of things about myself that God had said instead of what the enemy had said.
Your story is so inspiring because in so many ways, like there's 3 points that same thing happened over and over again. And that's why your testimony sometimes is what encourages you for your future, because you're going to encounter the same thing over and over again. And now you can go back and say, no, I overcame this, right? Initially, when you moved to Wisconsin, proving you overcame, right? Then when you went to college, proving, you're like, I'm not worthy. Well, you come into me and you felt not worthy and you overcame, right? Work, you had all this anxiety and like, no, it's not me. You know, I don't want somebody to pull out the belt because they'll see who they've said I'm doing, you know, that lie. And then the other side of that was what? You overcame. So,
yeah.
I feel like this is a pattern that is going to definitely be reflective of like, you can use this testimony. So anything that comes at you, you can see what's going to come at you, you know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate that. That's actually tracking some things pretty well for me, thinking about that. But I overcame, man. I got out of it and I'm in a much better spot.
You became, like, when you went to that high school, you overcame and you were really accepted and everyone celebrated you. You was intellect. No matter how you got through that, it was just the way you rationalized at that time. College, same thing. You went into a situation where it was like 10,000 and it was 77 students. And not only that, everyone knew you, right? As the president, everyone got to know you. Like it wasn't like you just overcame and said, "Oh, I'm good with this." You overcame in the sense where you was fully accepted and embraced. That's not the same as someone just traveling and saying, "Oh, okay, I'm just gonna exist." Same thing with this job. You came in as like, this is not what I do, this is not whatever, and then you became a director at 25.
Mm.
That's not overcoming at a small level, you know. That's seeds of greatness, you know. So it's inspiring to hear the level of overcoming. It's not overcoming like, you know, oh yeah, I've been at this job and I'm satisfied. It's overcoming like a conqueror. Like you come in, like the whole school know you, the whole university know you. Come in as a conqueror. That's like inspiring. I don't know if you ever reflect on that journey and say, wow, I'm really a conqueror, you know? But the way you traveled through that journey, it was very humble and meek. So therefore, you may have not seen it in that way, but for somebody like me who's seen it from the outside, it's like, wow.
Wow, that was, yeah, you're right. I mean, that's a really good way of looking at it. Conquering, you know, it actually reminded me of when I was in college, my junior year. I was president of the BSU, and President Obama, you know, at the time, President Obama, he came to our school. Well, he came to the city that our school is in. He spoke, and there were 2 students that were allowed to meet and greet him on campus. You know, this campus were like, let's have some students greet him, talk to him before he goes up, right? Out of 10,000 students, like, who could we possibly have meet the president of the United States, first Black president of the United States, right? You know, here I am, like, I'm just minding my business, right? And I'm like, of course, they chose the president of the student body. Remember Kaylee at the time, president of the student body. Of course, who else? We gotta have somebody else, though. And they were like, there's only one guy, you know. And then they called me up. The dean of the university called me and said, hey, can you meet President Obama at 10 a.m. on Saturday?
Bro, you like I said, scenes of greatness, bro. Like, can I touch the helm of it? Like, God has anointing over you, bro. God has anointing. Like, I have a sense of like, you know, I like beautiful things. I'm a very tough guy, but but because in this world, dealing with the world, I have to have a tough shell, you know, especially what I'm doing, get on the streets and dragging people. You know, it's a different ministry that other people, especially Christians, can't relate to. But if you see what I'm seeing from the right lenses, you can see what I'm doing. You know, but I love beautiful things, and that is such, like, if you look at your story and maybe one day you're writing a book, it's a very inspirational story. You know, yeah. So, did you have any last words? We have 3 minutes left before we go to Facebook group and have the meet and greet. Next, you can't join this time, but next time, prior to the table talk, an hour before, you have to register and you can do the meet and greet. You have any last word?
Last words. Yeah, kind of just reflecting on this conversation today. One, that hard work, like you mentioned, faculties and being able to navigate your history. Well, I'm realizing now, you know, that's a really important work that we got to do. You know, you asked me to come on here and share my testimony. I'm not going to lie to you. I often feel like I don't necessarily have the coolest stuff to say, you know, about my life, you know, coolest testimony. And yeah, it was encouraging to me. One, you're really good at just asking and probing and finding threads. So God bless you, man. That's amazing. That was encouraging to me. And but I'll say this. There's no testimony better than the next. And I'm realizing, like, you know, if we go and we investigate and we develop our history, we're going to find something really powerful. So it helped me today find real power in my testimony. I appreciate that.
Yes, amen.
We're set free by the blood of the Lamb, the word of our testimony.
Somebody like you, which I have a lot of respect and honor towards. Even though you're a young man, there's a lot of stuff that I see in you that is just light, and I appreciate that you can be reflective on your own journey, bro. You know, it's beautiful to see. And then you can kind of see your eyes just open like, oh, Lord, he's going here. What is he doing? This is not what this is about. This is not what it's about. Slow down, bro. Slow down. I saw all of that. But